Almost everyone has had a less than stellar examination experience. When this happens, students are taken aback by the exam. Either they prepared for material not on the exam, or they misread the instructor's expectations. At the same time, the instructor is equally surprised by the student's poor performance. As you can imagine, a situation like this can lead to a more complicated classroom environment, often creating an adversarial stance between faculty and students. The good news is that the chance of something like this happening in any classroom can be greatly reduced. Usually with only a small effort and a little planning, instructors can better focus their testing. Likewise, they can create a classroom feedback loop to track where students are in the learning process at any given point. At the same time, the students can more accurately practice content application in a low-stakes environment. My name is Sean Longstreet, and I am the Associate Director for the Teaching, Learning, and Technology Center here at the University of California at Irvine. And for the next few minutes, I would like to talk with you about assessment and how instructors can improve the classroom experience for both themselves and their students. Before I begin, let me point out that on this webpage is a link to the PowerPoint presentation associated with this videocast. Feel free to print it out for your own copy. Furthermore, we here at the TLTC encourage you to take advantage of all of our resources online and in our offices on the third floor of the new Anteater Instruction and Research Building. We always welcome visitors, and we would be happy to discuss any variety of subjects on teaching and learning with you. Now, let us first take a few minutes to talk about the dimensions of learning. It is important because it is critical for us to think about what we assess, and that we assess what we want our students to learn. In a simple breakdown, we can say that there are 4 dimensions to learning: declarative, procedural, conditional, and reflective. Declarative learning is the what of course content. It includes key phrases and concepts that need to be mastered as part of learning any subject. Procedural learning is the how element. The emphasis here is on application and methods, and it usually develops out of the content from declarative learning. Conditional learning stresses when and where to apply the knowledge and principles of a course. Conditional learning usually requires some analysis beyond procedural learning. Reflective learning is generally the most complicated or higher order if you're thinking in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. This is where students develop the skills to think about why. They practice analysis and synthesis and evaluation. The dimension here requires students to be creative and incorporate values and motives that stretch outside of the classroom across a much larger social dimension. It is important to design your tests around the type of learning that is emphasized in the course. Ask yourself, what is it that you value your students to learn? So, for example, if you're teaching a section in bovine anatomy where there's a stress on learning the parts of bovine cardiopulmonary systems, you might do well to stress the declarative aspects in your tests. On the other hand, if you want your students to be able to write a final paper that critically assesses how concepts of love differ between Shakespeare's sonnets and his comedies, then having a multiple choice test on historical events in Elizabethan England might not be the best use of your grading time. Now, let's think about assessment, or the evaluation of learning specifically. For now, let's say there are basically 2 types of assessment: summative and formative. Summative evaluation is the most common means of checking student learning, often in the form of a midterm or a final exam or a paper. Summative evaluations are approximations of student achievement at a given point in time and are necessary for creating a written record both for the institution and the students. One of the difficulties of summative evaluations can be that they usually occur at some terminal point in a course, informing students and instructors about learning gaps after it is too late or grossly inconvenient to do anything about it. Formative evaluation, on the other hand, is generally more informal, and it provides feedback to learners as part of an ongoing process. For example, self-tests and textbooks are probably the most common example of formative evaluation. And while self-tests can be helpful tools, they do have some limitations. First, the instructor does not receive feedback as to where students are experiencing difficulties with the content. Second, the student cannot ask the instructor for help with the problem that the self-test raised. Now, formative evaluation that occurs in the classroom alerts the instructor as to the progress of the class, allowing her to intervene where necessary. At the same time, students observe where and how they should concentrate their efforts, while also practicing for summative evaluations that will occur later in the semester. These are called classroom assessment techniques. Classroom assessment techniques are complementary to summative assessment. They respond to the need for checking how well students are processing course materials before summative evaluation. The benefits for invoking formative assessment in the classroom are threefold. First, they are learner-centered. That is, classroom assessment techniques are structured activities that model the type of learning the instructor intends for students to develop. Second, these formative assessments are instructor-directed, which means they inform the instructor about possible gaps in student knowledge or skills, and they can also be a great gauge for the effectiveness of course content presentation. Third, classroom assessment techniques are context-specific, which means they can address smaller sections of recently covered course content. This allows them to be low-stakes activities that break evaluation into smaller pieces and can act as a confidence booster for students. Let me give you two quick examples of classroom assessment techniques that involve relatively low effort on behalf of the instructor and the students, while also providing useful information. They only require an index card or a sheet of paper. They can be anonymous, or they can count for a small portion of the course grade. The first technique is a background knowledge probe. The background knowledge probe is usually anonymous. It's a quick exercise where the instructor asks the class to write a few sentences or a list of phrases that they associate with a subject about to be covered in class. The knowledge probe is an easy, non-threatening way for the instructor to quickly glean what his students know about a particular subject as well as their preconceptions about that subject. Armed with this knowledge, he has a better idea of where to begin and what to address in class. It also starts to model the types of questions that students should be asking, and it signals how content will be covered when the class resumes. Just as important, the background knowledge probe can be a confidence booster for students who either discover that they know much more about a subject than they thought they did, or that they're in the same boat as many others in the class. Another quick assessment technique is called muddiest point. In the muddiest point, the instructor asks everyone to write in a sentence or two what they saw was the most unclear element from the last reading assignment or lecture. This exercise encourages students to analyze content and to practice their written evaluation skills. At the same time, it provides clear indicators as to where the instructor can pick up when the class continues. When you are thinking about testing and specifically introducing classroom assessment techniques to the classroom, here are some things to bear in mind. First, keep your course objectives at the forefront. Remember to assess what you value. Second, when thinking about implementing classroom assessment techniques, plan for consistency. Third, make sure to provide a rationale. Explain how these exercises will help people achieve the course objectives and how formative assessment fits into the course. Fourth, strive for clarity. Give detailed instructions, both verbally and written. It's always a good idea to allow for extra time when you first introduce a classroom assessment technique. Fifth, it is important to respond to the information you gather in a timely manner to keep students in that feedback loop. This will help them adjust while the relevant material is still in the front of their minds, and they have an opportunity to improve on their learning. And if you decide to change something because of a classroom assessment technique, be sure to communicate this to the students. Explain how the feedback from the assessment had an influence. In conclusion, accurately assessing what you teach and the use of formative assessment in the classroom are great ways to improve teaching and learning effectiveness. They prevent surprises for both faculty and students, and they can make teaching more efficient because they can catch problems before there's any need to backtrack over large blocks of course content. Well, I want to thank you for your time. It's been my pleasure to talk with you about assessment. If you have any questions or would like to talk more about this or any subject, do come by and drop in for a visit. Thanks, and remember to have fun in class.